So I tried gaming on Linux for the very first time, and here is what I thought of it. Warning to all the Linux users out there, it was not great. So if you haven't seen my last video where I installed Linux for the first time, I recommend watching that in the link in the description. I go through like the distros that I wanted to try out and talk about why I wanted to switch to Linux in the first place. And then in this video, I tried playing some games for the very first time, and honestly, it was... there were a lot of weird quirks about it that really just kind of made me not want to use it very much. One of the first things I noticed when I was on Linux is that the internet speeds on Linux seem to be very slow, but also I noticed when I got back on Windows on this computer that it was like that also on Ethernet. So I don't think it was necessarily a like Windows Linux thing. I think it was just my Ethernet wasn't working properly, and that kind of, I don't know, I think it was just one of the things I noticed on Linux. So, and it was a problem already. So I don't know, it just kind of didn't make me very happy when I saw that. Also, another thing I noticed is that when I would do OBS recording, it just was very, very laggy for some reason. Like, I have a 3080, a 5800X. I don't think it should lag that much. I had the settings on to use like NVENC and everything, which I don't know if you guys know, that's basically NVIDIA's like encoding engine. I don't know if engine's the right word, but like it's like the coding process that NVIDIA chips uses, like when you're streaming or when you're recording, and it's supposed to help encode everything and make it smoother. But for whatever reason on OBS on Linux, no matter how I fiddled with the settings, it just didn't want to work properly. Like, I recorded all the gameplay in, I think I did some of it in 1440p and then some of it in 1080p. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't a great experience. Also, another thing I noticed is that even on my 1440p monitor, Linux thought that it was a 5K monitor. I have no idea why. Like, it's 1440p, 144 hertz. It's not even 4K. Like, this monitor's 4K, but it was this monitor that was like, oh, this is a 5K monitor. And I'm just like, what? Just a couple weird bugs like that I don't really understand why they were there, and it really just was not a great experience in my opinion. So I want to try a few different types of games on Linux. First, I want to try a native game, and then I also wanted to do some translated games using Proton on Steam. I wanted to try a game using Lutris for Origin. I wanted to try Minecraft, and then I wanted to try GameCube emulation using Dolphin. So the game I chose for the native Linux support was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. When I was playing it, it was very smooth, like how I was playing it. Some things that I noticed, it did not have RTX support, which is very weird. I just think maybe on Linux, RTX isn't supported. I don't think it's necessarily because of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I think it's more of a Linux thing. And like, I know it's one of those features where it's kind of a gimmick and not everyone's going to appreciate it, but for a game with like visuals like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I want to have RTX on. I know for games like Call of Duty, like you might not want RTX on because you want to get the most frames, but for something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider where it's a single player game with a lot of like landscapes and like theatrics, I think for a game like that, you would want RTX on. And for those guys that don't know what RTX is, basically it's just ray traced lighting. It's something that like only the newer NVIDIA cards and like the newest AMD cards can do. And then also the PS5 and the Xbox Series X can do it. But it's just one of those things where it's like, if RTX is a feature and I'm paying for it and I have a 3080, then I want to be able to use it. I understand that with RTX support, a lot of that comes down to NVIDIA giving the support to Linux, which if they did give it to Linux, maybe in the future I would be willing to try it out again. But it was just one of those things where I would have liked to see it. Obviously, it's not like a deal breaker for me because it's RTX. It's not something like super important, but it was just something that was missing that I would have liked to see. During the gameplay, I didn't notice any performance hits, and it felt like very smooth. The only thing that took me out of it was looking over at my OBS window and seeing that it was super choppy, and I'm like, oh my god, why is this super choppy? But if I was just focusing on the game itself, this is one of the examples of a game that would have worked very, very well on Linux. Then for Proton, I want to try out 2 games, one of them being a popular game and one of them being a not very popular game. For the popular game, I chose the very graphically demanding Among Us. I know nobody really plays Among Us anymore, but like, you know, I still do sometimes. Twitch.tv/Brandon Dillon. And I wanted to at least see how it works, mainly just because it's a game that gained a lot of support, and I think as a game that's very popular, I think we need to be able to see how well it will run on Linux. So on Linux, Among Us felt pretty much normal. Like, obviously it's not like a very graphically demanding game. Obviously frame rate doesn't matter that much on Among Us. Like, everything felt smooth still. It wasn't like anything like bad that I noticed. The only couple of things I noticed, there were a couple of weird bugs. Like any of the tasks in Among Us where you would have to click somewhere, like the weapons task, where it's like the radar, that one, even when you click in the middle, it doesn't line up. I think like the mouse calibration on Among Us for Linux is just off. And that's something that, like, if I played it a lot more, I'd be able to get used to it. But, like, it's one of those really, like, weird bugs that I don't think should be a bug in the first place. Then again, it's a game translated to work on Linux. It's not a native Linux game. But that being said, it was still not a great experience when I was doing those tasks, at least. So during like the air filter task, which if you don't remember, it's like with the leaves and you have to like push them into the vacuum. For whatever reason, my screen would just move all the way to the left, especially if I was like a ghost that round. And it really just was so random, and I don't understand why it was doing that. Now for a game that's not very popular but is also translated and has been said to work well on Linux, WWE 2K19. I know 2K22 is out. I don't have it on PC. I have it on PS5. I have 2K19. And you know what? 2K19 is still a great game, so I wanted to see how well it would work on Linux. And unfortunately for this one, even though it had a really good score on ProtonDB, which is like a website that ranks all the games that work with Proton, this game did not work very well. On a 1440p monitor with a 3080 on Windows, the game would have ran very, very smooth, would have gotten like 60 FPS. It would have been an overall enjoyable experience. But on Linux, it was slow, it was a little choppy. I think I forgot to turn off motion blur, so it was blurry. And it was not a good experience at all. Also, 2K19 on Linux did support controllers, but only kind of. So when you plug in a controller, instead of showing like X, A, B, Y, or like the PlayStation controls, it would show numbers instead, and it just makes it a little confusing if you don't know the controls of a game. And if you're someone who plays games with a controller on PC or Linux, I don't particularly recommend it unless you learn the Linux like button layout. The thing is, like, I know 2K19 is a game that I've played before, I've streamed it before even, but it's been a long time since I've played it, and 2K22 has different controls on the PS5, so it was kind of like I had to like kind of relearn WWE 2K19, but I would see myself going to press the 2K22 buttons, and it would make me like mess up in the game. So I kind of just wish that it would show like either Xbox or PlayStation controls, regardless of if it's a PS5 or Xbox controller, because I know both layouts. So it wouldn't be that hard for me to pick up on if I see like Xbox controls and I'm using a PlayStation controller. And overall, the game just was not a very good experience. I don't recommend that if you like to play the WWE games. I do not recommend installing Linux at all if you're one of those gamers. Maybe 2K22 is better on it, but I have no idea. Minecraft is a game that really let me down on Linux. So when I first launched Minecraft, full screen just didn't work. It was like the game would full screen, but like for using the mouse, it would only work in the windowed section that like you had open beforehand. And it was just such a weird bug. Like, usually when you full screen a game, every time I've done it on Windows, it just worked. And it was just very, very weird. After relaunching it though, the game worked fine. Like like it would line up and everything. But something I noticed is that when VSync was turned on, it would default to 60 FPS, but I have a 144 hertz monitor, so that doesn't really make much sense to me. If you guys don't know what VSync is, to keep it basic, it will limit the frame rate to whatever your monitor is to avoid like tearing and everything. But it was going at half the FPS that I could have gotten, and that was kind of annoying. As for GameCube emulation, this was probably the one that worked best for me. It took a little bit more of like configuration, but even on Windows, GameCube emulation takes a little bit of configuration, so I wasn't really upset about it. I did have to refix some of my controller setup a little bit at points because I think it just kind of undid itself. So that was kind of annoying, but other than that, it was a pretty normal experience. Everything was pretty smooth. The only things I noticed, by the way, the game I played was Simpson's Hit and Run. The only things I noticed were that the loading screens with audio were laggy. Like the loading screen worked and everything. The loading screen itself wasn't laggy. It was just the audio that was behind it that was laggy. Everything else, the audio was fine, so I don't know exactly what the problem was there, but it's emulation, so I'm not gonna get too butthurt over it. And overall, this was like the first thing I did on Linux where it just was an overall good experience, and I was kind of taken out of the fact that I was using Linux instead of Windows, and I wasn't really worrying about that, I guess. Something I forgot to mention, I was going to be playing games on Origin through Lutris, but for whatever reason, Origin wouldn't let me log in. I wanted to try Jedi Fallen Order, but it just didn't want to work. Overall, the experience on Linux was fine. I think depending on the games that you play, it could be a good experience for you, but for me, I just didn't really like it that much. I liked the user interface and everything. I like how Linux looks. I appreciate everything that you can do with Linux if you're not a gamer. But it's just a huge learning curve that I don't really have the time and effort to really put into it. I was pretty upset about OBS not working because it's one of those things where it's like, I use OBS sometimes because I like streaming, and it just didn't want to work for me. Also, other things like my mic and my Steam Deck don't work on Linux for whatever reason, and it's one of those things where it's like, I paid a lot of money for this stuff, and like, I don't want to just kind of like take away the option of using those, and it was just a bummer. And like, here's the thing, even if I'm just using my mic on Discord or something, it's still nice to at least have a mic to use. The only mic I could use is the Camlink mic worked, but it would require me to have my camera plugged in and turned on like at all times that I'm on Discord. And even though like it's not a huge deal, it's just like a bigger hassle that I just don't want to deal with. The final verdict is that I am not going to stay on Linux. As a typical everyday user who just wants to play games, I don't think it really makes a lot of sense for me to switch over to Linux full time. It was fun to try, and I'm glad I did. And like, I do appreciate and understand a lot of the applications that require Linux. Like, I know there's server applications and like different coding applications. I know for stuff like that, Linux makes a lot of sense. I don't think for a typical everyday user it makes much sense, and I know that there's people in the Linux community who are going to say you are wrong, just you're stupid, but I don't know, it's just very difficult to use, especially for someone who is used to like a Windows or a Mac environment. Anyways, that is it for this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you give it a big thumbs up and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you guys are notified whenever I post new videos. I'm gonna try and do some more videos soon. I just got a 14-inch MacBook, so I do wanna try and talk about some things that I like about this. I've had it for like about a month now, so I think there's a lot of stuff that I could go over. If you guys are interested in that, maybe I'll do it. If you guys aren't, then maybe I won't. Anyways, that is it for the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.